Hi, welcome to the Modern Application Development Screencast. In this short screencast, we will look into CSS frameworks like Bootstrap. Before we start, open the following applications on your Ubuntu desktop so that you can work along with me. A browser, Firefox or Chrome, a gedit text editor, which comes default with your Ubuntu desktop, and a terminal to run some command line applications. Bootstrap is an open source CSS and JavaScript framework. JavaScript part is optional. Bootstrap makes it easy to develop and style responsive web pages, or as we call it, web apps. Bootstrap was originally developed at Twitter and was called Twitter Blueprint. There are many other CSS frameworks like Tailwind CSS, Foundation, a jQuery, UI, etc. But today we are going to look into Bootstrap. If you want to explore Tailwind, you can go to tailwind.css. If you want to explore, let's say, Foundation, then you can go to get.foundation. But we are not going to explore them today. What we are going to explore today is Bootstrap that can be accessed at getbootstrap.com. Once you go into that page, you can either go to docs or examples. I would go to get started, so we can quickly get started. To actually get started, I've already created a simple empty HTML file called bootstrap _ test.html. I've opened the same thing in an gedit. As you can see, it's empty, and I've opened the same thing in browser, so we can refresh it as we change. Let's go back to bootstrap.com and see how to import the CSS and JavaScript files. So there are two ways to quickly start with Bootstrap. One is you can download the files, host it locally and link it, or you can use the hosted CDN version. There are two parts to it, like I said, CSS and JS parts of Bootstrap. CSS part is compulsory, JS part is optional. It's required for some of the features like popper or tooltips and popovers, model box, etc. Otherwise, it's not required. You can just include the CSS part of it. But I'm going to just include both of them, and we're going to explore them. So let me just create an empty HTML with just hello world text with Bootstrap. So this would look like any other HTML file, with HTML tag, doc type description, meta tags, description, closing body and HTML. The additional things are, we are describing a viewport. This is required for Bootstrap to handle the responsiveness. As we change different devices, the site accordingly responds and changes, and this viewport is required for that. A viewport definition is required for that. And then we add a link to the CSS file of the Bootstrap, and we have a link to the, or included the JS part of the Bootstrap. You can include the JS part at the bottom of the body so that it won't slow down as it loads. So that the page will appear and then the JavaScript will load. When the body, after the body is rendered, so it won't stop. So it will be faster loading. Here we just have a title tag and an h1 tag, a header tag with just showing hello world. Now if I open my browser and refresh it, just shows hello world. It's simple, nothing complicated here. And now the interesting things start when you start customizing things or when we start using layout. Let's go to layout part, because we are going to design layouts to have contents or form elements and stuff. As I told you, Bootstrap works really well when we want to do responsive websites, or it renders quite well. It has 6 sizes for various devices. You can use any of those, or you can use the default one. I'll go to the container one. Container is the basic structure that is required if you are going to go with Bootstrap grid layout. And container can be of various sizes based on screen size, but we can use the default container which will use the available screen size, or it adopts the existing available screen size. That is, if, like for example, if the screen is less than 576 pixel, then it will use whatever is available. Let's say if it's 300 pixel, it will use all 300 pixels. And if the screen is between let's say 1200 and 1400, it will always use 1140 pixel. If it's more than 1400, it will use 1320 pixel, right? That's what the container is. If you want to use everything available, then you can use container fluid, but I would usually go with default one, so it's easy for us to design, at least to start with, right? Now a grid is like a matrix. It's columns and rows, so it's easy to develop the structure that you want on an HTML page. Here I think you can see a container is defined, a row is defined by giving a class row, and then there are 3 columns defined. Let's add this to our HTML, right? I'm just going to leave this as it is and add a layout with the container at the top, and then 1 row with 3 columns, right? So if I refresh, it shows 3 columns. Now I just want it to show border, so I'm just going to add a style called border, which is also given by Bootstrap. So then you can see the size. Now in Bootstrap, the total width of the container is divided into 12 columns. When you don't give the size of the column, it divides equally into number of columns, like 12 divided by number of columns. Here you would say this is like the spans column width of 4, this also 4, and this is 4, so it will become 12. Now you can play around. For example, if you want to change it, like let's say this is big, this also is big, and this is small, totally it should be 12, so it will be 2, and then you can refresh. You can see that it got readjusted and it becomes 5 column width, 5 column width, and 2 column width, right? And you can play around, like if you add another row here, you can see it becomes the same, but you can even change. You can structure it however you want. Say you want last column to be 5, right? So it becomes, here it is 5 column width, 2 column width, and 5 column width. And you can play and structure your content or layout as you want. This is the basic of layout in Bootstrap, and this, just by using row and column width and container, you can design a lot of layouts, right? I would say go to the layouts part of the Bootstrap thing and explore rest of it. Like you can explore, this is what we saw already, columns. You can explore gutters and other things, and gutters is a space between 2 columns. If you want to explore, you can give more space, less space, and organize like that. You can try out those things. Next interesting stuff is content, where it tells you how your H1s and H2s look like. Here we already have an H1 which looks like this, and since we are using the default theme, it's the same as this. You can redefine them if you want to, but this is how they look like. And then like you can customize them to make it look in a very different way if you want, by adding different class sizes. Like if you make it display 1, it becomes really big, of this size, and we can just try to do it and see how it looks, right? Here So, I'm just going to remove it. So just by adding classes, you can do a lot of stuff, right? And like, for example, if I remove the style, you can see how the page becomes, right? So by just adding classes and including the Bootstrap CSS, I can layout it very well. Now this layouting also keeps even when you change the device, like, because it's responsive. Like, for example, I'm here in the developer tools, I'm changing it to a different device, and you can see in each device how it looks. It still tries to keep that structure same, right? Because it's 360, it keeps whole of 100% of 360. Let's say iPad Pro. You can see in iPad Pro it structures really well. In all, there's no compression. I mean, even in the smaller devices, it tries to keep the structure responsive, right? That's one of the good use of Bootstrap, that if you want to develop a same website that looks nicer on all devices, you should use frameworks like Bootstrap to reduce the amount of code that you will have to do otherwise, right? Now let's see how a form looks like. I'm just going to remove this and add a form here, right? So I've just added a form here. I'll just refresh the page to show how it looks, and then we'll go through it, what it means. Here you can see a beautiful form with blue button, submit button, checkbox, and borders and highlights, help text under the text input. And when I click on even the check me out, it actually checks. You don't have to click on the checkbox itself. You can click on the text as well. It checks the checkbox or unchecks the checkbox. All these features are just added by adding appropriate classes. Now we can just go through this. There is a form tag as usual, and you can see there is inputs. There are 3 inputs: input email, input password, input checkbox, and then there is a submit button, right? Now each of them is added into a different div, which had added a class called mb3, or class added mb3, which tells you what is the spacing around that div. You can go to the spacing part of the Bootstrap and see what it means and how much space it adds, how much border it adds, and stuff like that. It's a cleaner way to add space around the area. Like if I remove this, for example, you can see it gets compressed and there is no spacing here after this div. Like if I remove this, if I add back again, you can see that it gets pushed down and there's a space around this whole div, right? And it makes it cleaner and looks nicer too. Now within this div, there is a label for the input control, with a label as a HTML tag, and email address as the content. And you can see this label is for this input, the input that has the ID example input email. As you can see, this and this are same, so this label is for this input. Similarly, this label is for this input, because for, which is a attribute, contains the ID of the input control for which this is the label, or form element for which this is the label. Similarly, here is the input control, right? And the label for it is here, right? And how does it know this label is for this input? This for attribute has the ID of this input, right? Now here is an information which is very useful. If I this for relation is what makes when I click check me out, it also clicks checkbox, this, right? I'm clicking on the text, but it's unchecking the checkbox. For example, if I remove this and refresh it, now if I click, doesn't happen, right? So this also plays that role of making the whole text, checkable. Similarly, it's also useful for, text readers or like screen readers rather, to see, which label is for which input control. Then it would know, like, this input control has a label email address using this matching, right? That's very useful. There is also other, attributes that you can use to help the screen readers. One of them is called ARIA described by. There's another one called ARIA labeled by. Labeled by is similar to for. You can read it here how it is used. And then described by also tells you an ID of the text area which describes this input. For example, this attribute tells our div which has the ID email help is the description of this text box, which is this. And what is the description? This is the description, right? So this is very, very useful when you're trying to develop an inclusive or accessible web application, where web applications can be used by blind people or people who have difficulty in accessing the screen. You can go to this URL. I'll share this URL to read more about it. And you can also see the MDN documents to get more information about these two, at least ARIA described by or ARIA labeled by attributes. These are the most often used attributes to describe the things that can be used by screen readers. Now we have here the vertical form, like for example there is this and then there is this and then there is, what if we wanted all of them in a row? We can, we just learned how to make columns and rows. We can convert this into columns and rows. For example, I can add a row here, row here. Let's say class row. I'll just end that here. Right? I'll just make this into columns. Right? Now this button is outside this, it's not in a column, so I'm just going to add a column for this as well as a separate column. All right. Okay. Now if I refresh, so you can see that it's become horizontal. In one row, you can see all the form elements. Otherwise, the form remains the same. Now, there's lots of space wasted here between these two, and these two columns doesn't need to be same size as these two. So we can play around with the size. We can make this as 4, can't be 4 and 4 because then we don't have much left. So 3, let's say 3, 3 plus 3, 6. We have another 6. We can do 4 and 4. It's 2. Okay, and let's put 2, 2, 2, 4, 6, 10. So it can be made 4 and 4. Okay, 4 and 4, 2 and 2. Right? So you can see that it's stretched out well. This has become good size. This got reduced. You can even play around little more with these. For example, if you want to make this as 3 as well, and you can make this as 1, it goes to the side. If you don't want to do that, you can return it back and see how it looks. And you can organize like that. If you want to see clearly where the border ends while you're developing, you can just put border as a style, and you can remove it once you are done development. This will just help you in debugging if you want. Like, you can see that how much of space is around, and then you can play around, and then you can remove the border once you are done. So now we know how to play around with the layouting, right? There are many other things that are useful, which are subforms. And there is also validation, which is very important. You can have a look at this. You can enable validation of specific type just by adding the class types, right? Like this. We won't go into detail of it. You can check it yourself later. Right, let's go to components. Components are various UI elements that you can directly use without doing much of the coding, just by adding styles. For example, this is accordion, where you can have different divs that will expand or compress as you click on them. There are alerts that will look in different ways. Buttons, you can style the buttons. You saw that we are given one primary. If you want to make it green, you can just make it button success. For example, we can make this as button success, and all you need to is change the style, it will become green, right? It's as easy as that. For example, you can add tooltips to the tool. For example, I want to add a tooltip to the button saying please submit. That's done by adding these data attributes. Let's say I want it for this, so I'll just add tooltip on the left side, show it on the left. I'll just add title or tooltip as please click to log in. All right. So if I refresh it, and then if I mouse over it, it will show please click to login, right? You can do many other things like that. Right, like there are popovers that are useful when you want to do, you get popovers. You can also do button groups, 3 buttons together or 4 buttons together, like front and back, next page, previous page. You can style them. There's also model dialogues, which you want to do some submission, then you can show the confirmation messages. For example, when somebody clicks delete, you can always show them the model dialogue saying, are you sure you want to delete? Then you can take his input. You could use model components in that case. There are many other components that you could use to make your application look beautiful, accessible, and useful, all by just playing around with the classes and structuring the content. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.